my biggest messages is for women to really tap into what feels right for them. And that is going to be unique for every woman. You know, there's no right way to birth a baby. There's no right way to parent that child. And I think that when we can really learn to trust ourselves, our experience is incredibly enhanced, and there's more space for, that joy and appreciation, and we don't experience as much of that, fear and the guilt that so many of us navigate, on this journey.
Hello, and happy Mother's Day. You might have noticed this episode is out a couple days early, and that's because I wanted to celebrate Mother's Day with you. When I realized Mother's Day was coming up really fast, I could think of no one more suited to a special Mother's Day episode than Bailey Gaddis. I asked Bailey to join me today to wish you a wonderful Mother's Day. Whether you've already given birth, you're on the journey of growing a baby, or even if you're just beginning the journey of conceiving a new life, we are all mothers in our own way. And even though this episode is special for Mother's Day, and Mother's Day only comes once a year, we need to be celebrating the gifts and the challenges of motherhood every single day. If you're listening to this episode when it first airs, you may still be sheltering in due to COVID-19. And if so, I hope it's with your closest loved ones and you're all safe and well. Even if you and I are not spending this day exactly as we pictured a couple months ago, I hope you are feeling loved and celebrated for being your authentic and wonderful you. And now, let's begin your Journey to Birth Mother's Day special. Welcome to the Journey to Birth podcast. Today, I wanted to record a special Mother's Day episode to celebrate and acknowledge the transition into motherhood, take a look at different perspectives of what it means to be a mother. And when I thought about what I really wanted to include on this episode, I could think of nothing better than to bring on a really special guest, and that is Bailey Gaddis. Bailey is a mother. She has been a writer for many publications, including her own book, Feng Shui Mommy. This is the childbirth guide that she wishes she'd had when she was pregnant. She is also a certified hypnotherapist, hypnobirthing practitioner, a childbirth educator, and a birth doula. So welcome on to the show, Bailey.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So I wanted to spend some time talking with you about just different insights on what it means to be a mother, some different perspectives on how we can acknowledge different stages of motherhood, and talk a little bit about some of the other perspectives that you have specifically to having the different levels of introspection that you have in the work that you do, bringing together the body, the mind, the spiritual aspects, and how all of that shows up for us as mothers.
Yeah, absolutely. My insight about all of this obviously started, when I became pregnant. And, before that happened, I could kind of conceptualize what the journey was like, but I was shocked in a really beautiful way about how powerful the transformation was really between the period of learning I was pregnant and then birthing my son even, and just that process of becoming a mother during pregnancy. And one thing that I was really surprised about, I shouldn't have been surprised, was how many opinions were thrown at me. And I was told, oh, well, you're going to have an epidural, right? And you'll do the cried out method. And I was essentially told by so many people how I should be a mother and the right way to be a mother. And that felt off to me. And it really forced me to look inside and figure out, number one, where my intuition was, how to listen to it, and how to, summon the courage to really trust it. And while I certainly make plenty of missteps as a mother, tuning into that intuition and really trusting it has completely transformed my experience as a mother, what I write about, the courses that I teach. And that's why, one of my biggest messages is for women to really tap into what feels right for them. And that is going to be unique for every woman. There's no right way to birth a baby. There's no right way to parent that child. And I think that when we can really learn to trust ourselves, our experience is incredibly enhanced, and there's more space for that joy and appreciation, and we don't experience as much of that fear and the guilt that so many of us navigate on this journey. So yeah, that's a bit about how I got to this place, and and have this perspective.
Yeah, one of the things I really love that you bring up in all of the work that you do is the idea of allowing women to really connect into that intuition. I think so often we already can be disconnected from that pretty readily in modern culture for various reasons. Probably is getting worse and worse as we move forward with technology and outside distractions, and life just moves at such a rapid pace now. Kind of bringing women back to that. How do you help encourage women to find that intuition if they don't feel like they can find it and trust it?
Yeah, in my classes, I teach it in a pretty simple way. The first way I describe it is, when you ask yourself a question, and it could be about anything, what you want to watch on television, what you want to eat. Typically, that first instinct that comes up, that first answer is your intuition trying to give you a message. And I think it is very similar, with, say, a birth decision, for example, when you're thinking, what intuitively feels right to me? Do I want an epidural? And when you ask that question, there's usually this gut instinct before all of the different opinions start bombarding us. Like, you have that sense of what you want to do, but then, the voice of your mother, for example, and your best friend, and all of these people that have told you, what the right choice is, starts to get into the mix. And I feel like even if all those people are well-meaning, we get further and further away from that message of our intuition. So, to just sit in silence, especially with the bigger questions about, how we want to parent, to give yourself plenty of time to literally be in a private, quiet space so you can actually hear the voice of your intuition. And to, do practices, this is nothing new, but, to journal what you're exploring, to really give yourself that time with yourself to receive those messages. And in the beginning, for a lot of us, it feels scary to trust our voice above all others. We've been trained to ask for permission before we make choices in almost every aspect of our life. We want that validation that this is the right choice. And usually we seek that validation outside of ourselves. So it's a process, and it's not like one day you just immediately decide, I'm going to follow my intuition and that's it. We have to learn to trust it. We have to give ourselves that time, that space, that quiet to get to know it, and to just allow ourselves to follow that path that it lies out for us.
Yeah, I think that the concept that inside and outside, kind of where our need for validation, often we seek that from the external sources, right? Are we doing the things that we feel like we should be doing, as we're kind of told by all of those sources, whether it's our mothers or mother-in-law or a friend or a coworker, or just what we think, even if nobody's even said it, but just how we kind of interpret what everybody else is doing.
Right.
And then kind of balancing that with what we're really feeling on the inside. And which I think is where some of your feng shui perspective brings another level of depth to this whole conversation, because the overriding concept of feng shui, if I'm not mistaken, is that you're kind of balancing external and internal.
Exactly.
And we can bring that into all these other roles that we play in life. So can you tell us a little bit about how that background kind of informs how you mother now?
Yeah. So before I became pregnant, I had a home organizing business in Los Angeles, and I, would utilize some feng shui, principles. And I just really love that idea of how our external environment, the energy in our home impacted our internal environment and that energy. And so when I started working on the book, the proposal for it, I definitely kind of shifted the definition of feng shui a bit. And there are, chapters in the book that directly relate to it. But the idea was, okay, well, what would it look like for a pregnant woman to harmonize the energy in her mind, in her body, and her spirit? And that's how I organized the book, to really look at those different aspects of ourselves throughout the journey, through pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood. And, how do we harmonize those three crucial parts of ourselves? What does that look like? And that word balance, of course we're all striving for it, but it's almost impossible to achieve this like perfect state of balance. And I don't think, that even exists really. But I think just being aware of those different aspects of ourselves and putting in some effort to nurture them, I think can positively influence every aspect of our life, but especially, that connection with our baby and that connection with ourselves, and it goes back to, the very popular idea that when we are happy and healthy, we're able to better parent, better connect with our child. And so often that creates a happier, healthier child. So that's a really roundabout way of answering your question. But that's how feng shui, really influenced me.
Yeah, I love that you bring that in. A lot of what I try to bring to this podcast is just different perspectives that we can come across that really help inform our birth and our transition into motherhood, and really our whole journey of life can be if we start to see all of these other sides and just ways to view things. So
absolutely,
I love that you have that piece. It just really kind of brings a big piece that can really help people flourish, help women especially flourish, but the whole family flourish too if they bring these concepts into the household.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if you have some tips that you could share for women who are preparing to transition into motherhood.
Yeah, so I already kind of mentioned that first one, starting to learn the voice of the intuition, learning to trust it. I think the next one is, really preparing yourself to cut yourself a lot of slack, because something that is almost guaranteed is that motherhood will not look exactly like we expected it to, for better or worse. Usually it's just different. And we will not always be making decisions that feel amazing. There's going to be a lot of trial and error. And something that I experienced in early motherhood was a lot of guilt. I was really hard on myself, and those emotions really distracted me from actually connecting with my son and being in the present moment. So I think knowing that none of us are perfect at this, there's going to be a lot of transitions, especially in those first few months, to just give yourself so much compassion, so much leeway. One of the other big things is taking the time, which I know this is hard logistically, but taking the time to stay connected to who you are, because as much as, we love our children so much, and sometimes our entire identity can get wrapped up in that role of mother. So of course we're even harder on ourselves if we make any missteps with that. So, even if it is like 30 minutes a day where, a partner or a friend comes and takes baby. And I tell moms in my class, it's like, do something, while some of us find laundry therapeutic, to try to not, just like take care of the laundry or dishes, but to really think, what lights me up? What makes me feel more connected to, my true self? And to do that, even again, if it's only for 30 minutes. For me, that was writing, for some women going on a walk, painting, whatever it is, to take those little moments to really stay connected to who you are. Because I think that can be incredibly rejuvenating and help us get through that first year, which can be, really taxing emotionally, physically, mentally. And my last one, I would say being prepared for all the unsolicited advice. I mentioned getting that in pregnancy, but that was nothing compared to what I experienced when my son was a baby. I received a lot of it. I didn't know what to do with it. It made me feel a lot of shame, even though most of the people providing that advice were coming from a good place. I felt like they were judging me. I felt like I couldn't do anything right. It was really tricky. So, I tell moms now, one of the things we do in my class is we come up with go-to responses when somebody's giving unsolicited advice, coming up with something that can help you get out of that conversation and not get absorbed in that. Because again, I've said it before, I feel like we can trust ourselves more than anybody. And there's not somebody out there that has the secret answer to what will work for your family. Ultimately, I think the mother, and again, the partner can be wonderful too and very insightful, but I am a true believer that the mother ultimately knows what is best for her and her baby.
I think that piece about connecting to yourself, taking time to really do that, and having to separate from the baby a little bit in order to really authentically do that does help you become a more authentic self, which you need in order to become a more authentic mother. Right. I think if you're not spending time doing that, at some point, your kid's going to catch on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too. They're so wise and instinctive in that way that they'll have these ways of telling you that they know that you're not doing the best that you can for yourself, and that can impact your ability to show up for them as well. Absolutely. So I think that's, so important. Such a great piece of advice. The other thing that I often will tell women who are preparing to become moms is that babies are really forgiving. Oh. So even if you make mistakes, it's completely fine. They're going to forgive you. They're going to accept you. Right. They're just going to keep on rolling along with it as long as you do. So
so much more resilient than we give them credit for.
Oh, so much. Yeah. And they know a lot about what they need, and they'll help guide you too if you pay attention to that, which is part of connecting into that intuition, I think, as well.
Yeah.
I did an interview with a postpartum doula, and one thing that she brought up that I feel like you're kind of hitting on in some of the things that you're saying is that while we spend so much time preparing for birth, like this big event that's not likely to take more than 24 hours, and we don't put as much focus into what it means to become a parent, to become a mom, to have a newborn in the house. And that goes on for weeks, months, years.
Yeah, right. The rest of our life.
Yeah. It's such an important thing to be talking about, because it can be a tough transition for some people. So.
Yeah, right.
So I wanted to touch a little bit also on the concept of mom guilt. You brought that up already, that you felt like you had a lot of that. I think a lot of the tips that you shared already will help somebody who's struggling with that, or who may be just on the verge of having their baby and becoming a mom, even though you're really already a mom before your baby's on the outside.
Yeah.
But what words would you say to somebody who feels like they're struggling with mom guilt?
Yeah, I would say going back to that compassion part, and this is so hard, and I still have not gotten all the way there with it, but trying to give yourself as much compassion as you give your child, and realizing that you suffering or martyring yourself, that's not helping anyone. For example, for me, the guilt would mainly come when I would take that time for myself, or I would, work on a writing project and my son would be away from me for a couple hours. Even now, having a 6-year-old, I experience that guilt daily, when I have to work, and just realizing that we are human, and ultimately, taking that time for ourselves, or even making a mistake, if we're feeling guilty for doing something that later we're like, oh my gosh, for example, with the 6-year-old, if you raise your voice or you do something that later you feel so guilty about, realizing that that is helping your child grow in so many ways. Watching the mother take time for herself or making those missteps, that is in some ways even more important than the days where we're rosy and cheerful and, always with them. They're learning how to survive and exist and forgive themselves, because as you mentioned, even babies, they're so much more intuitive and knowing than we give them credit for. They feel that energy we're putting off. And so when we can give ourselves permission to forgive ourselves, to release that guilt, which I believe is something that we can do, choosing to say, I give myself permission to forgive, and to even physically just envision that guilt draining out of you, replacing it with compassion can make a huge difference. And just like everything, that takes practice. And the more, you allow yourself to do that, I think the easier it gets. This is not something that I made up. Can't remember who said it, but the idea that in some ways, guilt is a worthless emotion. And I don't think it's totally worthless. I think sometimes it can give us powerful messages, but I think a lot of the mom guilt that I at least experienced, it was worthless. It was just distracting me from moving forward and, finding the lesson in something or connecting with my child. So yeah, I guess it boils down to that forgiveness and compassion.
I think most of the time our guilt is coming just from ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? It's something that we are creating and manifesting that really doesn't need to be there.
Right.
It may be that we need to learn something that we can do better next time, but it's not something that is coming from anything real.
Yeah.
In a way, it's something that we've kind of created that we think we're not doing right from putting all that pressure on ourselves to be perfect.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the earlier our kids learn that none of us are perfect, the less pressure and stress it is for everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Oh, I wanted to touch on something I heard you say, I think on another podcast, or maybe it was in your book, but the idea of how we as mothers are, many of us anyway, are not good at asking for help.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so often we feel like, again, going back to that good mother idea, we feel like if I'm a good mother, I can do it all on my own, and we have this misconception that everybody else is doing it on their own, when so often we don't know what's happening in somebody else's home, and when you pull in social media and all of those kind of snapshots of people's lives, we create this false illusion that everybody else is doing it better than us. And if we were just only better, we wouldn't need that help. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to say, look, I'm struggling. I can't do this all on my own. I need you to help me. Even just with our partners, I find with my husband, sometimes it feels scary to say, again, I'm struggling. I need you to step in with our son, or I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And especially if we are asking for help, outside of our home, that gets even scarier because, again, we're forced to be even more vulnerable. But the beautiful thing with that is once we do ask for that help and we realize how often people really want to give it, I think that people are so much more, receptive to being asked for help than we realize. I volunteer for a program that's called the Parent Care Program, and essentially they train volunteers to go in and somewhat act as like postpartum doulas, but we're mainly matched with, families that are struggling in some way with their newborn, and we go in and do laundry, just sit and talk to the mom, help them in any way that they need to. And I tell all the moms that I've been paired with, it's like, I feel like I honestly get more out of it than they do. Not to say they don't appreciate it, but people want to help, and it makes them feel almost just as good as it makes you feel. So I think that's something else to remember. So often you're not burdening somebody by asking for that support. You're giving them something as well. And yeah, it's uncomfortable to do in the beginning. It is uncomfortable to ask for help, but once we just give ourselves little tastes of what it's like, to ask for that help and to receive it, we realize that it opens us up to so many beautiful possibilities. A lot of times the people that help us, we create deeper relationships with them. Our child benefits because they're developing more connections. I think letting go of that belief that asking for help is selfish, or a sign of weakness. I think that's the first step. And then again, just starting to ask for help and to see the miracles in many ways that can happen. I know that that's what happened to me when I became brave enough to ask for help and to state what I needed really clearly.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I talk about a lot with women too, is so when I teach, I have them kind of do this assessment where they identify their type based on, it comes kind of out of the Chinese philosophy of elements.
Yeah.
But there's also correlations to a lot of other things in Chinese philosophy, which you probably know with the feng shui background. And so I coordinate it more with elements just because it works, or with, not elements, with directions. So north, south, east, west. And depending on the type that you resonate with, it will kind of show you how those kinds of challenges, like asking for help, might show up for you, and whether it's based on it being perceived as a fear of being perceived as being weak, or, because you're a very independent type, or because you feel like you always have control of everything, and sometimes you don't, and that's a really hard place for you to be. Right. Just to kind of be aware of what it is that's blocking you from being able to ask for help, because I think it can be different for every person, why that's such a hard thing. Right. But it's a hard thing in almost every elemental resonance. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Yeah. And I think, at one point in time, we would not have been isolated into family units like we are now. We would have been in a village type society somewhere along the way, and you would have had all of your elders helping. You wouldn't be doing this alone with, being the mom at home, having your partner potentially leaving the house to go to work every day, and you're here from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. with your newborn alone, and trying to manage the household and all these other things we stack on top of ourselves. Yeah. And then if you're working too on top of that, it's a lot.
It is.
So being able to understand that, one, the asking for help thing, almost everybody struggles with that. It's not something that you're alone in. Yeah, definitely not. And needing help, everybody needs that too. Also not something that you're alone in.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think then that perspective that you brought up earlier, where we get that perception in our mind that everybody else is able to do this, why can't I? Why am I struggling so much? And I think it's even become a lot worse now with social media and all of these ways that we have to see everybody's perfect pictures and perfect days, or when they post something that is maybe a more difficult part of their day, they're posting it as something hilarious. Yeah, right. But nobody's posting the difficulty or the struggle, or very rarely. I won't say it never happens. It certainly does. And maybe right now more so than usual. But we tend to kind of think that view is what everybody's life is like 100% of the time, which is definitely not true when it comes to parenting. Yeah. Parenting at all. Yeah. Definitely in the newborn stage. Right. Yeah.
Well, something that I've been working on recently, I have a new book coming out in spring 2021, the same publisher, and this book has been really interesting to work on. It's called Asking for a Pregnant Friend, and we essentially have, I don't know the final number that we'll have, but like 101 answers to questions that are more taboo about pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood. And that has been really fascinating, to canvas the women that I work with, women that I'm, friends with, to see, what are, those taboo questions that we don't feel comfortable asking. And I've been so surprised, with a lot of the answers, and kind of diving into what so many believe is kind of like the underbelly of motherhood, but just realizing how universal so many of these concerns are and how afraid a lot of us feel to really be open and honest about what we're really experiencing. And we feel that, societal pressure to push down a lot of our more authentic worries. Luckily, things like postpartum depression and anxiety, they are becoming less taboo, and amazing people, very brave women are coming out and talking about it more. And so, of course, that allows other people to be open with those challenges. But yeah, that has been really interesting. And I get, emails about all sorts of stuff because I've been starting to post videos based on the book. And it started some really interesting, conversations. For example, somebody emailed me yesterday and, she's feeling immense guilt because she just had a new baby. And, that question that people always ask about, well, will I love my, second child as much as my first, or will it, change that dynamic? And of course, the go-to answer is no, you'll appreciate them both equally and everything will be equal and balanced, and she emailed saying, I have my new baby and I don't enjoy being with my second child as much. They're like grating on my nerves. She's like, I love them both equally, but I don't like them both equally, and I've been starting to get more and more of these questions. Like, I don't want to tell anybody this, but does it make me a bad mom or, whatnot. So that has opened my eyes to this whole other side of motherhood and made me really examine more of, I don't even want to say, those like darker thoughts or questions, but the more authentic ones, and what my experience really, really is, and how that's changed, as I've gotten deeper into motherhood. And I think that's something that a lot of us, or our society has placed on us, once we become mothers, we become, completely, virtuous, and it's all like kid shows and rainbows, and we no longer have, any darker thoughts or, with sexuality, we can't talk about that. And I feel like that requires that we leave behind so much of our identity, or at least we only, show this, rosy persona. And so it's just something I'm still exploring, what does it look like to be more honest about that and to share that side of ourselves, and how does that transform motherhood? So I don't know. I don't think I'm even really making some strong statement with that, but it's been something interesting that I've been exploring and researching with this new book.
Well, I think that you are making a very strong statement in just the fact that you even came up with the idea to do this book. I think, a lot of times we talk about this stuff and we'll touch on topics like postpartum depression and, mothers maybe not feeling like they're connected with their babies and, things that are becoming more acceptable to talk about. Mm-hmm. But we don't get into that authentic, real emotion stuff and the real humanness of what it means to become a parent, and, right, versus what we think it means or what we think it should mean to become a parent, which are not going to be the same thing. Yeah. So I love that you're doing this. I cannot wait to see this.
Thank you.
Another year, huh? So you said that there's videos that you're already posting. Where can we find them?
Yeah.
Kind of follow this work you're doing.
Yeah. So my YouTube channel, Bailey Gaddis, just look at YouTube Bailey Gaddis. They're all on there. And I've just been going through the manuscript's not completely done yet, but I've just been going through that and creating, video answers to a lot of the questions that are in the book, and just kind of starting a conversation with a lot of the women that follow me on that, and which has informed, a lot of the editing of the book, and really getting in a variety of voices, and, not just having it be from my perspective, but hearing stories from different women that have experienced, these different questions and conundrums. I just did a video, it isn't posted yet, but about postpartum OCD, and, that whole experience of women having these really scary thoughts about, harm coming to their baby, for example. Sometimes that looks like women having thoughts about actually harming their baby, which nobody wants to talk about because they feel like if I have that thought, will somebody take my child away? Or, and really diving deep into that and looking at the difference between, postpartum OCD and postpartum psychosis, which is incredibly rare with the women that would actually, cause harm, but really opening that wide open and giving women a space to talk about that and to realize that just because they're having these scary thoughts does not mean they're actually going to act on them, or does not mean that that's something that they actually desire. It is a really natural, normal part of what our mind is going through as we transition into motherhood. And it's something, again, we rarely hear about because nobody wants to fess up to it, for lack of a better term, which I understand. It's something scary that we experience, but I've just been so in awe of the mothers out there and how open and honest they are. It makes me really hopeful for the future and for, what it looks like to be a mother, and that, we aren't going to be stuck in that role that even, I know my mother, we talk about it a lot, she was really stuck in that kind of stereotype of this is what it looks like to be a mother. If you step outside of that box, society will punish you. And a lot of times we place the punishment on ourselves, but yeah, just communicating with these women has made me realize that things are changing and there's no longer this like box that we need to fit into to be like a good mom, that we get to create our own definition for what that looks like. And I feel like, finding places that we can be truthful is a big first step.
Yeah, this is really great work. Thank you for bringing this.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the idea?
I was talking with my publisher, about an idea for a second book, and we were just kind of brainstorming, and she had the idea of like, what if we did like answers to all sorts of, questions, and then I kind of rolled with that, like how could we make it something that really isn't out there, because there's plenty of books where you can get answers to, breastfeeding positions and whatnot, which is amazing. We need that, but it's like, how could we make this deeper and really make a bigger difference? And then I think I swear that same day I met up with a girlfriend who's really open and honest, really, really open about everything. And I just, after I left that conversation, I felt so good. And I realized that every time I'm with this woman, I feel really refreshed afterwards. And I really feel like I can be myself with her. I don't feel like I'm going to be judged. And so I decided like, that's what I want this new book to be, this safe space that women can go to get these answers and to hear other stories from women that are being really raw and really open, and to help remove a lot of the shame from the questions and experiences we have as we go through motherhood. And I had to get really brave with writing this book because I didn't just want to share other women's stories, but it's like, okay, if I'm going to show up for this project, I have to really go there with myself. And I think there's things in this book that my husband probably doesn't even know. And I don't mean that in like a juicy, salacious way, but just, really showing up and kind of putting my money where my mouth is. It's like, okay, if I'm asking other women to be brave and be honest, I have to do that too. So I'm really putting everything in a way into this book, and it's scary, but it feels good to finally just share what my honest experience has been.
Yeah, that will be a big journey for you.
Yeah.
As well as everybody else who will be touched by it.
Oh, thank you.
I think that feeling you get with your friend who's really open and raw, and you have that really human connection. I think that's your balance moment there. Right?
Yeah.
Your exterior and your interior can just harmonize because there's nothing in between. We have those rare moments with those people where we can hit that moment.
Yeah, you're not having to edit or try to put on a mask or be somebody else. You can just really be authentic, which I realize we can't do that all the time, but to seek out those relationships or those outlets, I think is so therapeutic.
Yeah. And where we get big doses of insight. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's usually where that transformation comes, when we're really,
Mm-hmm.
really going in there and really looking at ourselves. It can be amazing. Yeah, I really felt, passionate about my first book and love it and hope it, continues to help women. But I was really surprised by this book and how excited I am for it, and just how fascinating it's been to research so many of these topics that I used to shy away from. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to see how women respond. And I'm sure I'll get all kinds of responses. That's something that I've realized as I'm writing it. It's like, this is going to probably rub some people the wrong way. And I'm very, I tried to use the same approach in this book as I did with the last one, not telling anybody what they need to believe or that this is the right way, just sharing information, sharing stories, sharing research. But I definitely am having to put myself out there more with this book than the last one. But yeah, and thank you for creating a podcast like this. I think it's so important for, women to just hear different voices outside of, their own community, and to just connect us all.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a long time coming, but you know how that goes.
Yeah.
Working on books and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes a while to get all the pieces together, but yeah. Well, can you share with us where everybody can find you and get copies of your books or follow you to get more great information?
Yeah, absolutely. BaileyGaddis.com is where my book stuff, writing, all of that is. And then YourSereneLife.com, and I can email you this, is where, there's more information about my courses and more about, the hypnobirthing and hypnotherapy, that side of everything. But those are probably the best two places to go. And then from there, it's easy to find the YouTube channel and social media and all that kind of stuff. And then hopefully soon I'll have some more stuff up about the new book. It's in the last leg of that journey.
I'm looking forward to following your new book. I don't do YouTube a whole lot, so I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah. And I usually, I'm so slow at this. We'll try to post some of the videos to my Instagram and Facebook as well. But YouTube is definitely the most up to date with all of the most recent videos and stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom about transitioning into motherhood and just looking at all of the different sides of what it means to be a mom, how to deal with some of the struggles and the pressures that we might be facing as moms, and just, improving the quality of life of moms everywhere.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me in this conversation with Bailey Gaddis. If you'd like to find Bailey or her books, which I highly recommend for anyone preparing for birth, or even if you've already had your baby, her book Feng Shui Mommy will still be an immense benefit to you. You can find it on her website at baileygaddis.com. That's BaileyGaddis. While you're there, you can also find the link to her YouTube channel and her social media pages. And if you want to find more information about her online childbirth courses and her hypnobirth courses, you can visit YourSereneLife.com. And I will, of course, provide all the links to these in the show notes for you. As always, let me know how I can support your journey. If you have topics you'd like to hear about, guests you'd like to hear from, questions or comments to share, let me know. This podcast is always transforming, and you can help shape it into something that helps thousands of families have the best pregnancy, birth, and transition into parenthood possible by leaving a comment or a review, or sharing this podcast with others in your life who will benefit from our discussions. Find me on the socials at Natural Birth Compass, or email me at info@naturalbirthcompass.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on our next episode. Wishing you a wonderful journey to birth and a very happy Mother's Day.